The fine arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between a credit card offer and a pizza coupon, and when I opened it, my blood pressure spiked so high I could hear my pulse in my ears. $500 for improper placement of mechanical equipment in violation of community aesthetic standards. I'm Bryan Zimmerman, and I had just installed a backup generator at my house in Meadowbrook Estates, a subdivision in Richardson, Texas, after last winter's ice storm knocked out power for 6 days straight. My wife Sarah had been 8 months pregnant at the time, and we'd spent those terrifying nights huddled under blankets in our friend's apartment across town. I swore then that I would never put my family through that again. Now we had a 9-month-old daughter, Emma, and the generator was my insurance policy against nature's unpredictability. The generator sat exactly where the electrician had placed it, on a concrete pad behind my house, 15 feet from the property line, connected by a licensed professional to a transfer switch that met every single requirement in the National Electric Code. I had researched this installation for months, obtained all the necessary city permits, and paid nearly $8,000 to ensure everything was done correctly. I walked back into my house, still clutching the fine notice, and found Sarah in the living room trying to get Emma to take her afternoon nap. She looked up at me and immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, adjusting Emma on her shoulder. "The HOA just fined us $500 for the generator," I said, holding up the letter. "What? Are you serious?" Sarah stood up, swaying gently to keep Emma calm. "That doesn't make any sense. You got all the permits. The electrician said everything was perfect." "Apparently, they think it violates aesthetic standards." I read directly from the letter. "The placement of said mechanical equipment is visible from neighboring properties and creates an unsightly appearance that diminishes the community's visual harmony." "That's ridiculous." "You can barely see it. It's behind the house, surrounded by those shrubs you planted." I had indeed planted a row of dwarf yaupon holly shrubs around 3 sides of the generator, specifically to minimize its visual impact. The unit itself was a Generac model in a neutral tan color that blended with our house's exterior. Unless you were deliberately looking for it from the Hendersons' backyard next door, you would hardly notice it existed. "I'm calling the electrician," I said. "Mike told me everything was up to code." "Maybe he knows about HOA rules too." I pulled out my phone and dialed Mike Patterson, the master electrician who had done the installation. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Bryan, what's going on?" "Mike, I just got a fine from my HOA for the generator placement, $500. They're saying it's not in compliance with community standards." There was a pause on the other end. "That's complete nonsense. We went over this together. The installation meets every NEC requirement. The setbacks are correct. The pad is properly grounded. The transfer switch is inside your garage exactly where it should be. I've been doing this for 23 years, and that installation is textbook perfect." "Can you put that in writing? I need to fight this." "Absolutely. I'll send you a letter today confirming that the generator placement complies with all National Electric Code standards, local building codes, and city ordinances. The HOA doesn't override electrical safety codes, Bryan. They can have opinions about aesthetics, but they can't make you violate code or remove safety equipment that's legally installed." "Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it." After hanging up, I sat down at my kitchen table and read through the HOA fine more carefully. At the bottom was a name, Barbara Dennison, HOA president, and a phone number for disputes. I checked my watch. It was 3 in the afternoon, still business hours. I dialed the number. A woman answered after 2 rings. "Meadowbrook Estates HOA, Barbara speaking." Hi, Barbara. This is Bryan Zimmerman from 4582 Oakmont Drive. I just received a fine for my generator placement, and I need to discuss this with you. Oh, Mr. Zimmerman. Yes, I personally issued that citation. Your generator is in clear violation of our community guidelines. Her tone was clipped and formal, with an undercurrent of satisfaction that immediately irritated me. I forced myself to stay calm. Can you tell me specifically which guideline it violates? I have all my city permits, and my electrician confirmed the installation meets National Electric Code requirements. Mr. Zimmerman, city permits and electrical codes are one thing. Our community has standards that go above and beyond basic legal requirements. Section 7.3 of the HOA covenant states that all mechanical equipment must be screened from view of neighboring properties. Your generator is clearly visible from the Henderson property. I planted shrubs around it specifically for screening, shrubs that haven't grown in yet. The equipment is still visible. Additionally, you didn't submit an architectural modification request before installation. That's required for any exterior addition. This caught me off guard. I didn't know I needed HOA approval. I got city permits. Doesn't that cover it? HOA approval is separate and mandatory. It's in your covenant, which you signed when you purchased the property. Her voice had taken on a lecturing quality that made my jaw clench. The fine stands. You have 30 days to pay or face additional penalties. What if I don't agree with the fine? You can file a formal dispute with the HOA board. We meet the first Thursday of each month. The next meeting is in 3 weeks. Until then, the fine remains active, and you'll need to remove or relocate the generator to an approved location. Remove it. I just spent $8,000 on this installation. That's unfortunate, but compliance with community standards isn't optional. Have a good day, Mr. Zimmerman. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, anger building in my chest. Sarah came back into the kitchen, having finally gotten Emma down for her nap. Well, she asked. She says I needed HOA approval before installation. I have to file a dispute and wait 3 weeks for their monthly meeting. Did you check the covenant when we bought the house? I hadn't. Like most home buyers, I had signed a mountain of paperwork at closing and trusted my real estate agent when she briefly mentioned HOA fees. Sarah and I had been so focused on finding a house with good schools nearby and a yard big enough for Emma to play in that we hadn't scrutinized the HOA rules. I went to my home office and dug through my filing cabinet until I found the thick folder from our house closing 2 years ago. Inside was the HOA covenant, a 50-page document filled with single-spaced text. I flipped to Section 7, which covered exterior modifications. Section 7.3 stated, all mechanical equipment including but not limited to air conditioning units, pool pumps, generators, and utility equipment must be screened from view of public streets and neighboring properties. Architectural modification requests must be submitted to the HOA board for approval prior to installation. Section 7.4 stated, the HOA board reserves the right to require removal or relocation of any equipment deemed to be in violation of community standards, with costs borne by the homeowner. I leaned back in my chair, frustrated but trying to think strategically. The covenant was vague about what constituted adequate screening and what qualified as an approved location. My generator was behind my house, not visible from the street, and only minimally visible from one neighboring property. The shrubs I had planted would fully screen it within a year as they matured. I decided to draft a formal dispute letter. I spent the next 2 hours writing and revising, citing the National Electric Code, my city permits, Mike's confirmation of proper installation, and the fact that the generator served a critical safety function for my family. I noted that the equipment was already partially screened and would be fully screened once the shrubs reached maturity. I requested a hearing at the next board meeting and asked for the fine to be waived. Sarah read my letter and suggested softening some of my more confrontational language. "You're not wrong," she said, "but you want them to work with you, not dig in their heels." She was right. I revised the letter again, striking a more conciliatory tone while still firmly defending my position. I printed it, signed it, and prepared to mail it the next morning. That night, I researched HOA disputes online. What I found was both enlightening and disturbing. Countless stories of homeowners fined for ridiculous violations like the wrong shade of paint, unapproved mailbox designs, or kids' toys left in the yard overnight. Some disputes escalated to lawsuits, costing tens of thousands of dollars. HOAs had the power to place liens on properties for unpaid fines, potentially leading to foreclosure. But I also found cases where homeowners had successfully fought back, particularly when safety equipment or legal installations were involved. In a Florida case, a homeowner had won a judgment against their HOA for trying to ban solar panels. In Arizona, an HOA had been forced to allow a generator installation after a homeowner with medical equipment argued it was necessary for health and safety. I took notes and bookmarked several legal precedents that might support my case. I was prepared to fight this, but I hoped it wouldn't go that far. The next morning, I mailed my dispute letter and called several neighbors to ask if anyone else had installed generators. Tom Henderson, who lived directly behind me, answered on the first ring. "Hey, Brian, what's up?" "Tom, quick question. Did Barbara Dennison ever talk to you about my generator? The HOA fined me for it." "Yeah, she came by last week. Asked if it bothered me. I told her I barely notice it, but she kept pushing, asking if I thought it was an eyesore." "Honestly, man, I think she was looking for ammunition. I tried to stay neutral. Do you actually have a problem with it?" "Not at all. After last winter, I've been thinking about getting one myself. That storm was brutal. If you do, let me know. Maybe we can fight the HOA together." After hanging up with Tom, I walked outside to look at the generator from his property line. I had to stand in a specific spot in his backyard and look directly at my house to see the unit. It was partially obscured by the shrubs in the corner of my garage. Calling it an eyesore was absurd. 3 days later, Mike Patterson emailed me a formal letter on his company letterhead. It was perfect. He detailed the installation process, confirmed compliance with all NEC standards, cited specific code sections, and affirmed that the location was appropriate and safe. He even included photographs of the installation showing the proper clearances and the surrounding landscaping. I attached Mike's letter to my dispute and felt more confident about the upcoming board meeting. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned more about Meadowbrook Estates HOA than I had in 2 years of living here. Barbara Dennison had been HOA president for 6 years. Before that, she had run for the local school board and lost. Several neighbors described her as overzealous, someone who drove through the neighborhood looking for violations. She had issued fines for trash cans left out past noon on collection day, grass that exceeded 4 inches in height, and a child's basketball hoop that was deemed improperly positioned. One neighbor, Janet Ortiz, told me she had received a fine for painting her front door a shade of blue that was not on the approved color palette, even though the exact color was listed as colonial blue, which appeared on the HOA website. It took her 4 months and 2 board meetings to get the fine reversed. "Barbara runs that board like her personal kingdom," Janet said. The other board members are too intimidated to stand up to her. Good luck, Bryan. You'll need it. The Thursday of the HOA meeting arrived. The meeting was held in the community center at the front of our subdivision, a small building with a meeting room that could hold about 30 people. Sarah stayed home with Emma, and I went alone, carrying a folder with my dispute letter, Mike's certification, my city permits, and printouts of several legal cases I had researched. I arrived 15 minutes early. The meeting room had folding chairs arranged in rows facing a table at the front where the board members would sit. A few neighbors were already there, most looking resigned or anxious. I recognized a couple of them from walking around the neighborhood, but didn't know their names. At 7 o'clock sharp, Barbara Dennison entered with 4 other board members. Barbara was exactly as I had pictured her. Mid-50s, short blonde hair styled with too much hairspray, wearing a blazer and pearls, carrying herself with an air of authority that seemed disproportionate to her actual role as president of a suburban HOA. The other board members were Carl Roberts, the vice president, Linda Shaw, the treasurer, Dennis Park, the secretary, and Michelle Torres, a member-at-large. They all looked significantly less enthusiastic than Barbara. Barbara called the meeting to order and began with routine business: approval of last month's minutes, a financial report from Linda, discussion of landscaping maintenance for the common areas. 20 minutes passed before she reached the section on disputes. "We have one formal dispute tonight," Barbara said, glancing at a paper in front of her. "Bryan Zimmerman is appealing a fine for unpermitted installation of a generator. Mr. Zimmerman, would you like to present your case?" I stood up and walked to the front of the room, my folder in hand. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "Thank you. As you know, I installed a backup generator at my home after last winter's ice storm. I have a 9-month-old daughter, and losing power for 6 days was dangerous for my family. The generator was installed by a licensed master electrician, Mike Patterson, who confirmed in writing that it meets all National Electric Code requirements." I held up Mike's letter. "I have city permits for the installation. The generator is located behind my house, 15 feet from the property line, on a proper concrete pad with correct grounding. It's partially screened by landscaping that will fully mature within a year. This equipment serves a critical safety function." Barbara interrupted. "Mr. Zimmerman, did you submit an architectural modification request before installation?" "No, I wasn't aware that was required. I obtained city permits, which I believed covered the necessary approvals. Ignorance of HOA rules isn't an excuse. Every homeowner receives a copy of the covenant at closing. I understand that now. However, I believe the fine should be waived given the circumstances. The generator meets all legal requirements, serves a safety purpose, and is already being screened. I'm asking the board to approve the installation retroactively." Carl Roberts, the vice president, spoke up. "Can we see the photos of the installation?" I passed out copies of Mike's letter with the attached photos. The board members examined them, passing them back and forth. Dennis Park studied them carefully. "It's really not that visible," Dennis said. "And if those shrubs grow in, you won't see it at all." Barbara shot him a look. "Visibility isn't the only issue. The process matters. If we let homeowners skip the approval process, it sets a precedent that our rules don't matter." "But he has city permits," Michelle Torres said. "Doesn't that count for something?" "City permits and HOA approval are separate," Barbara said firmly. "We can't have people doing whatever they want without board oversight." Linda Shaw, who had been quiet until now, looked at me. "Mr. Zimmerman, did you know you were supposed to get HOA approval?" "Honestly, no. I should have checked the covenant more carefully, and that's my mistake. But I acted in good faith, followed all city requirements, and installed equipment that protects my family. I'm not trying to undermine the HOA. I'm just trying to keep my daughter safe. Barbara leaned back in her chair. The board will discuss this and vote. You can wait outside while we deliberate. I returned to my seat in the audience. The board huddled together, speaking in low voices. I could see Barbara gesturing emphatically while the others mostly listened. After about 10 minutes, they straightened up, and Barbara addressed the room. The board has discussed Mr. Zimmerman's appeal. We acknowledge that the installation meets electrical code requirements. However, the failure to obtain prior approval is a serious violation of our covenant. The fine will be reduced from $500 to $250 as a gesture of good faith, but it will not be waived entirely. Mr. Zimmerman has 60 days to submit a formal architectural modification request with detailed plans for additional screening. If the screening is deemed adequate, the generator may remain. Otherwise, it must be relocated or removed. My stomach dropped. Relocated where? The electrician placed it in the only location that meets code requirements for setbacks and utility access. That's not our concern, Barbara said. Our concern is maintaining community standards. You have 60 days to comply. This is unreasonable, I said, my frustration boiling over. I have a legal, permitted installation of safety equipment. You're essentially demanding I spend thousands more dollars to fix something that isn't broken. Mr. Zimmerman, I suggest you watch your tone. The board has made its decision. If you continue to argue, we can increase the fine back to the original amount. Carl Roberts looked uncomfortable. Barbara, maybe we should. The decision is made, Carl. Barbara's voice was sharp. We're moving on to the next agenda item. I left the meeting furious. At home, Sarah could see it on my face before I said anything. That bad. Worse. They reduced the fine to $250 but are still making me jump through hoops. I have to submit an architectural modification request and add more screening, or else relocate the generator, which isn't even possible without violating code. What are you going to do? I'm going to fight this. Barbara Dennison isn't going to bully me into wasting more money or removing equipment that keeps our family safe. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney named Philip Grant, who had experience with HOA disputes. His office was in Dallas, about 30 minutes from Richardson. I explained the situation, and he agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Philip's office was in a modest building near the downtown area. He was in his early 40s, dressed in a business suit, with a tired but intelligent look in his eyes. We sat in his office and I laid out the entire timeline, the installation, the fine, the board meeting, and Barbara's decision. Philip listened carefully, taking notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Okay, here's the situation legally. The HOA has the right to enforce its covenants, including architectural approval requirements. You did violate their process by not getting approval first. That's not great for your position. My heart sank, but Philip held up a hand. However, they're on shaky ground trying to make you remove or relocate legally permitted safety equipment. Texas law has provisions that limit HOA authority when it conflicts with statutory rights. There's a case precedent in Texas where an HOA tried to ban generators, and the court ruled in favor of the homeowner, citing the essential nature of the equipment for health and safety. So I can fight this. You can. But it's going to cost you. Legal fees for an HOA dispute can run several $1,000s, maybe more if it goes to court. You need to decide if that's worth it compared to just paying the fine and complying with their screening requirements. It's not about the money at this point. It's about the principle. Barbara Dennison is abusing her authority, and if I don't stand up to her, she'll just keep doing this to other people. Philip nodded. I respect that. Here's what I suggest. Let me draft a formal letter to the HOA board, outlining your legal position and requesting they reverse their decision. We'll cite the relevant Texas statutes and case law. Sometimes that's enough to make an HOA back down, especially if they realize you're serious about fighting. And if they don't back down, then we file a lawsuit. But let's try the letter first. I agreed, and Philip said he would have the letter ready in a few days. I paid his consultation fee and left feeling more hopeful than I had since this whole mess started. While waiting for Philip's letter, I did something I probably should have done earlier. I went door to door in my neighborhood, talking to other homeowners about the HOA. What I discovered was eye-opening. Nearly everyone had a Barbara Dennison story. The Martinez family had been fined for having their garage door open too long while unloading groceries. The Patel family had been cited for an unauthorized vegetable garden in their backyard, which was supposedly only for ornamental plants. The Johnsons had been fined for parking their truck in their own driveway because it was deemed a commercial vehicle, even though it was just a personal pickup truck. Most people had simply paid the fines to avoid further trouble, but the resentment was palpable. Several neighbors asked if I was planning to challenge Barbara, and when I said yes, they encouraged me to keep pushing. Someone needs to stand up to her, said Kevin Martinez. She acts like she owns this neighborhood. On Friday afternoon, Philip emailed me his letter to the HOA. It was 4 pages long, professionally written, and devastating in its logic. He cited Texas Property Code Section 202.003, which limits HOA authority when it conflicts with other laws. He referenced case law where courts had ruled in favor of homeowners on essential safety equipment. He pointed out that the NEC compliance and city permits demonstrated my good faith effort to follow all legal requirements. He concluded by demanding that the fine be waived and the generator installation approved, or else we would pursue legal action. I read the letter 3 times, feeling a grim satisfaction. This was serious now. Barbara would have to take me seriously. Philip sent the letter via certified mail to ensure proof of receipt. We also sent copies to each individual board member at their home addresses, which Philip obtained through public records. He wanted to make sure the whole board saw it, not just Barbara. Sometimes board members don't know what their president is doing, Philip explained. When they realize there could be legal liability, they suddenly become much more reasonable. A week passed with no response. Then on a Wednesday evening, I got a phone call from Carl Roberts, the HOA vice president. Bryan, hi. It's Carl from the HOA board. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Sure, Carl. Look, I received the letter from your attorney. So did the other board members. I wanted to reach out personally because, well, I don't think this needs to become a legal battle. I don't want a legal battle either, Carl. I just want to keep my generator without being fined for having legally permitted safety equipment. I get it. And between you and me, I think Barbara overreacted. The problem is, she's very invested in maintaining what she calls community standards. But your attorney's letter has some of us concerned. None of us want to expose the HOA to a lawsuit. So what are you suggesting? I'm going to call a special board meeting to reconsider your case. I can't promise anything, but I think if we vote again, the outcome might be different. Can you give us a week before your attorney takes any further action? I thought about it. Philip had advised me to be open to reasonable compromise, but not to let them string me along indefinitely. I'll give you 2 weeks, Carl. But if there's no resolution by then, we're moving forward with legal action. Fair enough. I'll be in touch. He sounded relieved when he hung up. I immediately called Philip and updated him. He agreed that 2 weeks was reasonable and told me to document everything. 10 days later, I received a letter from the HOA. It was from Carl Roberts, not Barbara Dennison, which I took as a good sign. The letter stated that the board had conducted a special meeting and reconsidered my case. By a vote of 4-1, they had decided to approve my generator installation, waive the fine, and require only minimal additional screening as a formality. I read the letter twice to make sure I understood it correctly. I had won. I called Sarah into the room and showed her the letter. She hugged me, laughing with relief. "I can't believe it. You actually beat them." "We beat them," I said. "This was a team effort." I called Philip and read him the letter. He congratulated me and said he would send a formal acceptance on my behalf, confirming that the matter was resolved. "You did good, Bryan," Philip said. "Most people don't fight back against HOAs. They just pay the fines and suffer in silence. You stood up for yourself and it worked." That weekend, I planted a few more shrubs around the generator, not because I had to, but because I wanted the installation to look nice. Tom Henderson came over while I was working, and we talked about his plans to install his own generator. "I'm definitely getting one now," Tom said. "And thanks to you, I know the HOA can't stop me. Just make sure to submit an architectural modification request first," I said with a grin. "Learn from my mistakes." A few weeks later, I ran into Dennis Park, one of the board members at the grocery store. He recognized me and came over to say hello. "I wanted to tell you," Dennis said, "that your case was a wake-up call for the board. Barbara has been ruling with an iron fist for years, and most of us were too passive to push back. But when your lawyer's letter came, we realized we could be held personally liable if the HOA got sued. It made us reevaluate how we've been operating. Is Barbara still president for now? But there's an election coming up in 3 months. I'm running against her. So is Michelle Torres. I think Barbara's reign is coming to an end. I hope so. She's made a lot of people miserable. That's why I'm running. This HOA should serve the homeowners, not the other way around." I wished him luck and meant it. When I got home and told Sarah about the conversation, she smiled. "See, you made a real difference, not just for us, but for the whole neighborhood." She was right. Over the next few weeks, I heard from several neighbors who had been inspired by my fight with the HOA. Kevin Martinez filed a dispute over his old fine for the garage door incident. The Patel family submitted a formal request to allow backyard vegetable gardens, citing food security and sustainability. Even quiet neighbors who had never challenged the HOA before started speaking up at board meetings. The election 3 months later was contentious. Barbara Dennison campaigned hard, going door to door and sending out flyers about maintaining property values and preserving community standards. But Dennis Park and Michelle Torres countered with a message of reasonable governance and homeowner rights. They pointed out that excessive fines and arbitrary rules were making Meadowbrook Estates an unpleasant place to live, driving down property values rather than preserving them. I volunteered for Dennis's campaign, helping him distribute flyers and talking to neighbors about the importance of voting. Sarah and I hosted a meet and greet at our house, where Dennis could talk to homeowners about his vision for the HOA. Nearly 40 people showed up, filling our living room and spilling onto the back patio, where my generator hummed quietly in the background, a symbol of the fight we had won. On election night, the votes were counted at the community center. Sarah and I attended, along with dozens of other residents. The turnout was unusually high, a sign that people cared about the outcome. When the results were announced, Dennis Park won the presidency with 58% of the vote. Michelle Torres was elected vice president. Barbara Dennison came in third, losing her position on the board entirely. The room erupted in applause. Barbara sat stiffly in her chair, her face frozen in a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. After a moment, she stood, gathered her things, and left without saying anything to anyone. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Dennis gave a short speech thanking everyone for their support and promising to lead with fairness and common sense. This HOA exists to maintain our community and protect our property values, he said. But it should never be a tool for harassment or unnecessary control. We're going to focus on the things that matter: safety, maintenance, and helping neighbors resolve disputes amicably. If you have concerns, my door is always open. The crowd applauded again, and I felt a sense of genuine optimism about the future of Meadowbrook Estates. Over the following months, the changes were noticeable. The new board revised the HOA covenant to clarify vague rules and eliminate the most arbitrary restrictions. They established a formal appeals process for fines, with clear guidelines and timelines. They reduced fines for minor violations and focused enforcement on issues that genuinely affected the community, like neglected properties and safety hazards. Tom Henderson installed his generator without any issues. The board approved his architectural modification request within 2 weeks. Several other families followed suit, and our neighborhood became known as one of the best prepared subdivisions in Richardson for power outages. One afternoon, about 6 months after the election, I was outside mowing my lawn when a car pulled up in front of my house. A woman in her 30s got out and walked up my driveway. I turned off the mower. "Hi," she said. "Are you Bryan Zimmerman?" "That's me. My name is Rachel Foster. I live over in the Greenbrier subdivision, a few miles from here. I heard about your fight with your HOA over your generator. I'm having the same problem right now, and I was hoping you could give me some advice." I invited her inside, and we sat at my kitchen table. She explained that her HOA had fined her for installing a generator and was demanding she remove it, even though it was legally permitted and installed to code. Her situation was eerily similar to mine. "I heard you won your case," Rachel said. "How did you do it?" I told her the whole story: the fine, the board meeting, hiring Philip Grant, the legal letter, and the eventual resolution. I gave her Philip's contact information and encouraged her to stand up for herself. "It's not easy," I said, "but it's worth it. These HOAs only have the power we give them. When homeowners start pushing back, they have to listen." Rachel thanked me and left with renewed determination. A month later, she called to tell me she had won her dispute. Her HOA had backed down after receiving a letter from Philip Grant, just like mine had. "You started something," Rachel said. "I've been in touch with 3 other people in the area who are fighting their HOAs over similar issues. We're all supporting each other now." It felt good to know that my experience had helped others. What started as a frustrating personal battle had become part of a larger movement of homeowners standing up to overreaching HOAs. That summer, we had a block party in Meadowbrook Estates, organized by the new HOA board. It was the first one in years. Families gathered in the community park. Kids played on the playground, and neighbors who had barely spoken to each other before struck up conversations over burgers and potato salad. Dennis Park made a point of thanking me publicly for challenging the old board. "Brian's fight over his generator was a turning point for this community," Dennis said. "He reminded us that we're not just homeowners paying dues. We're residents with rights, and we deserve to be treated with respect." People clapped, and I felt a little embarrassed but mostly proud. Sarah squeezed my hand, and Emma toddled around on the grass, chasing after another toddler from down the street. Later that evening, after we had put Emma to bed, Sarah and I sat on our back patio. The generator was barely visible behind its screen of mature shrubs, quietly standing ready for the next storm. The air was warm, and fireflies blinked in the darkening yard. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had just paid the fine?" Sarah asked. "Sometimes. It would have been easier in the short term, but we would have lost something important." "What's that?" "Our sense of agency. Our belief that we can stand up to unfairness and win. I don't want Emma to grow up thinking that bullies always win, whether they are HOA presidents or anyone else." Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder. "You're a good man, Bryan Zimmerman. I'm just a guy who didn't want to get pushed around. That's more than most people. Most people give in." She was right. It would have been easier to comply, to pay the fine, to move the generator or tear it out entirely. But easy isn't always right. Sometimes the harder path is the one that leads somewhere worth going. A few months later, in the fall, I was featured in a local newspaper article about HOA disputes in the Dallas area. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Chen, had heard about my case and wanted to include it in a larger story about homeowner rights. I agreed to an interview, and the article ran on the front page of the Richardson section. The headline read, "Local homeowners push back against restrictive HOAs." My case was the lead story, followed by Rachel Foster's experience and several others. The article included quotes from Philip Grant about the legal landscape of HOA disputes and from Dennis Park about the changes in Meadowbrook Estates. The article got attention. I received emails from people as far away as Houston and Austin, asking for advice or just sharing their own HOA horror stories. A couple of local TV stations called, wanting to do follow-up segments. I declined the TV interviews because I didn't want that level of attention, but I responded to every email, offering whatever help I could. One email stood out. It was from a state representative named Angela Morris, who represented a district south of Dallas. She wrote that she was drafting legislation to reform HOA governance in Texas, including clearer limits on HOA authority and stronger protections for homeowners. She asked if I would be willing to testify at a committee hearing when the bill was introduced. I called her office and spoke with her aide, who explained that the bill was in early stages but had bipartisan support. Representative Morris wanted real homeowners to share their experiences to illustrate why reform was necessary. "Your story is exactly what we need," the aide said. "It shows how arbitrary HOA enforcement can be and how homeowners are often powerless to fight back without significant expense." I agreed to testify. It felt like the right thing to do, a way to help make systemic change that would benefit people beyond my own neighborhood. The hearing was scheduled for early December in Austin. Sarah and I made a long weekend of it, driving down with Emma and staying in a hotel near the Capitol. On the morning of the hearing, I put on my best suit and went to the Capitol building while Sarah took Emma to explore the city. The committee room was formal and intimidating, with high ceilings and rows of seats for observers. I was one of 5 people testifying that day, along with 2 other homeowners, a real estate attorney, and a representative from a statewide HOA management company who opposed the bill. When it was my turn, I told my story clearly and concisely, hitting the key points: the installation of legally permitted safety equipment, the arbitrary fine, the initial refusal to reverse it, and the eventual resolution only after legal intervention. I emphasized that most homeowners couldn't afford to hire an attorney, which meant HOAs could effectively bully people into compliance even when the homeowner was in the right. I was fortunate, I said. I had the resources to fight back, but what about people who don't? What about retirees on fixed incomes, young families just starting out, or people who simply can't afford a lawyer? They're at the mercy of whoever happens to be on their HOA board. That's not right, and that's why this legislation is important. The committee members asked me a few questions, mostly about the specifics of my case, and whether I thought the proposed reforms would have helped. I answered as honestly as I could, acknowledging that some HOA oversight was necessary, but arguing that the current system gave too much unchecked power to small groups of people. The hearing lasted about 3 hours. Afterward, Representative Morris thanked me personally for coming and said my testimony had been compelling. "We've got a real shot at passing this," she said. "It won't solve every problem, but it'll make a difference." The bill eventually passed in the spring legislative session, though it took months of negotiation and compromise. The final version included several key provisions: mandatory mediation before legal action in HOA disputes, limits on fine amounts for minor violations, and explicit protections for homeowners installing safety equipment like generators or security systems. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. When the governor signed it into law, Representative Morris sent me a signed copy of the bill with a handwritten note. "Thank you for speaking up. This wouldn't have happened without homeowners like you." I framed the note and hung it in my home office, next to my electrician's license from Mike Patterson and the letter from the HOA waiving my fine. They were reminders of what was possible when you refused to back down from what was right. Life in Meadowbrook Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. Dennis Park proved to be an excellent HOA president, handling issues with fairness and transparency. The monthly board meetings became civil, even boring, which was exactly what they should be. There were no more stories of arbitrary fines or harassment. Barbara Dennison, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, had moved to a different subdivision in Plano. I felt no animosity toward her. She had been doing what she thought was right, maintaining standards and enforcing rules. But she had forgotten that the rules were supposed to serve the people, not the other way around. Emma grew into a curious, energetic toddler who loved playing in the backyard. When a storm knocked out power one evening during her second birthday party, the generator kicked on automatically, and the party continued without interruption. The kids didn't even notice. It was exactly why I had installed the thing in the first place. Tom Henderson became a good friend. We helped each other with yard work and shared tools. His generator installation had gone smoothly, and he joked that mine had paved the way for his. "You're a trailblazer," Tom said one afternoon while we were working on his fence. "The brave pioneer who fought the HOA dragon." "I just didn't want to pay a bogus fine." "Yeah, but you did something about it. Most people just complain and pay up." He had a point. Taking action was scary. It would have been easier to grumble about the unfairness and move on. But I had decided that easy wasn't good enough, and that decision had changed more than just my own situation. A year after the legislation passed, I got an email from Philip Grant. He had taken on several more HOA dispute cases since mine, and he wanted to thank me for the referrals. "You've become a bit of a legend in the HOA dispute world," Philip wrote. "People mention your name when they call me. They say I want to do what Bryan Zimmerman did. It's good for my business and it's good for homeowners. So thank you." I replied that I was glad to have helped and asked him to keep fighting the good fight. Philip was one of the few attorneys in the area who genuinely cared about homeowner rights, and I was grateful he had been there when I needed him. One evening in late spring, I was outside watering the shrubs around the generator when a car pulled up and a man got out. He was middle-aged, wearing jeans and a polo shirt, and he looked a little nervous. "Excuse me, are you Bryan Zimmerman?" "I am. Can I help you?" "My name is Robert Hayes. I live over in Clearwater Meadows, about 20 minutes from here. I've got an HOA problem, and I was told you might be able to give me some advice." I invited him to sit on the patio, and he told me his story. His HOA was trying to fine him for installing solar panels on his roof, claiming they violated aesthetic standards. He had all the necessary permits, and the panels were positioned to be as unobtrusive as possible, but the HOA president was insisting they be removed. "It's the exact same thing you went through," Robert said. "I read about your case online. I was hoping you could tell me how to fight this." I spent an hour walking him through the process, documenting everything, hiring Philip Grant, understanding his legal rights, and standing firm. Robert took notes and asked thoughtful questions. By the end, he seemed more confident. "Thank you so much," Robert said as he left. "I was ready to just give up and take the panels down, but you're right. If I don't fight, they'll just keep doing this to other people." After he drove away, Sarah came outside and sat next to me. "Another one?" she asked. "Another one. You've become the HOA resistance leader. I'm just a guy with a generator who didn't want to pay a stupid fine." "You're more than that, Bryan. You're someone who stood up when it mattered." That means something. I thought about that. Maybe she was right. Maybe by refusing to be bullied, by insisting on fairness and following the fight through to the end, I had done something meaningful. Not just for myself and my family, but for others who faced similar battles. Emma came running outside, holding a dandelion she had picked from the yard. She handed it to me with a big smile, and I held it like it was the most precious flower in the world. "Thank you, Daddy," she said in her toddler voice. "You're welcome, sweetheart." I looked around at our backyard, at the generator standing quietly in its corner, at the house we had made into a home, at my wife and daughter who made everything worth it. This was why I had fought. Not for pride or principle in the abstract, but for the simple right to protect my family and live peacefully in my own home. The generator had become a symbol of something larger. The idea that ordinary people could push back against unreasonable authority and win. That bureaucracy and rules, however well-intentioned, couldn't be allowed to override common sense and basic fairness. That sometimes you had to stand up and say no. It wasn't always easy. There had been moments when I wondered if it was worth the stress, the legal fees, the time and energy. But looking back, I had no regrets. I would do it all again, because in the end we won. Not just the specific case, but the larger battle. The HOA changed. The neighborhood improved. Other people found the courage to fight their own battles. Legislation passed that would help thousands of homeowners across Texas. All because I refused to accept an unjust fine for a generator that was installed legally and correctly to protect my family. That night, after Emma was asleep, I stood in my driveway and looked up at the sky. Stars were visible despite the suburban light pollution. A cool breeze rustled the trees. Everything was peaceful. Inside the house, I could hear Sarah washing dishes and humming to herself. The generator sat silent in the backyard, waiting for the next power outage that would justify its existence. The notice from the HOA that the fine was waived hung in my office, a reminder of a battle fought and won. I thought about all the people I had talked to over the past months, all the homeowners dealing with their own HOA nightmares. I thought about Robert Hayes and Rachel Foster and the dozens of others who had reached out for advice. I hoped they would find the courage to fight back, to stand up for themselves, to refuse to be pushed around. Because that's what it came down to, courage. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet, everyday courage of saying, "This isn't right," and refusing to back down. The courage to hire a lawyer when you're not sure you can afford it. The courage to stand up at a board meeting and argue your case. The courage to keep fighting when it would be easier to give in. I walked back inside, locked the door, and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new battles to fight. But tonight we were safe, warm, and together. The generator stood ready. The HOA had been defeated. The neighborhood was healing. And I was just a man who had installed a generator to protect his family and ended up changing far more than he ever expected. The story could have ended there, with a neat conclusion and a happy homeowner. But life doesn't work that way. There was one more chapter to this saga, one more twist that I didn't see coming. 3 months after the legislation passed, I received a certified letter from Barbara Dennison. Not from the HOA, but from Barbara personally. My hands shook slightly as I opened it, wondering what fresh hell this might be. The letter was handwritten, not typed. That surprised me. "Dear Mr. Zimmerman," it began, "I am writing to apologize for my actions regarding your generator installation. I have spent considerable time reflecting on my tenure as HOA president, particularly after losing my position on the board. I realize now that I allowed my desire for perfect community standards to override common sense and basic fairness. Your generator was legally installed, served an important purpose, and should never have been fined. I was wrong to push the issue, and I am sorry for the stress and expense I caused you and your family. I hope you can accept this apology, though I understand if you cannot. Sincerely, Barbara Dennison." I read the letter twice, then showed it to Sarah. "Wow," she said. "I didn't see that coming, neither did I. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was angry, remembering the frustration and anxiety Barbara had caused. Part of me felt vindicated, seeing this admission of wrongdoing in writing. And part of me just felt sad, thinking about someone who had invested so much of herself into a role that ultimately made her miserable and disliked. I decided to respond. I wrote a short letter back, acknowledging her apology and saying that I held no grudge. We had both learned lessons from the experience, I wrote, and I hoped she was doing well in her new neighborhood. I never heard from Barbara again, but I like to think that exchange brought some closure for both of us. The years passed. Emma started preschool. Sarah went back to work part-time. I got a promotion at my job. The generator ran periodic self-tests and stood ready for emergencies, though thankfully we didn't have any major power outages. Dennis Park served 2 terms as HOA president before stepping down, satisfied that the organization was on solid footing. Michelle Torres took over, continuing the same reasonable approach to governance. Meadowbrook Estates became known as one of the most livable, well-managed subdivisions in Richardson. Property values increased. New families moved in, attracted by the reputation of a fair HOA and a strong sense of community. The park where we had held that first block party became a hub of activity, with kids playing and neighbors gathering for impromptu barbecues. I stayed involved with HOA reform efforts, serving on a statewide advisory committee that helped develop best practices for HOA governance. It was volunteer work, unpaid and time-consuming, but it felt important. I met homeowners from across Texas, heard their stories, and helped develop solutions to prevent the kind of abuse that had once been directed at me. 5 years after the generator incident, I was invited to speak at a conference for HOA board members in Houston. The topic was balancing rules and rights, how to govern fairly. I almost declined, not sure I had anything useful to say to an audience of board members who might be defensive about criticism of HOAs, but Sarah convinced me to go. "You have a unique perspective," she said. "You've been on the receiving end of bad HOA governance, but you're not bitter or unreasonable. You can talk about what works and what doesn't from real experience." So I went to Houston and gave a talk to about 200 HOA board members. I told my story, emphasizing not the conflict but the lessons learned. I talked about the importance of proportionality, common sense, and remembering that the homeowners you govern are your neighbors, not your subjects. "Rules exist to serve the community," I said. "When rules become more important than the people they're supposed to protect, you've lost sight of your purpose. Ask yourself, is this rule making our community better, safer, or more pleasant to live in? Or is it just an exercise in control? If it's the latter, maybe it's time to reconsider." The response was better than I expected. During the Q&A session, several board members thanked me for the perspective and asked for specific advice on situations they were dealing with. One woman raised her hand and said, "I've been on my HOA board for 10 years, and I think I've been too focused on enforcement and not enough on relationships. Your talk made me realize I need to change my approach." That comment made the whole trip worthwhile. On the drive back to Richardson, I thought about how much had changed since that Tuesday afternoon when I first opened the fine notice. A simple dispute over a generator had become a catalyst for personal growth, community change, legislative reform, and a small but meaningful contribution to how HOAs operate across Texas. I never set out to be an activist or a reformer. I just wanted to keep my family safe during power outages. But one thing led to another, and suddenly, I was testifying in Austin and speaking at conferences and helping other homeowners fight their own battles. Life is strange that way. You take a stand on something that matters to you, and you never know where it might lead. When I got home, Emma ran to hug me. She was 7 now, tall and bright and full of questions about everything. She asked where I had been, and I told her about the conference. "What did you talk about?" she asked. "About being fair. About treating people with respect, even when you have authority over them. Like how teachers should treat kids, exactly like that." She nodded, satisfied with this answer, and ran off to play. Sarah smiled at me from the kitchen. "Good trip, really good. I think I actually helped some people." "You've been helping people for years, Bryan. This is just what you do now." Maybe she was right. Maybe fighting that first battle had changed something fundamental in me, made me someone who couldn't ignore injustice or let things slide. Or maybe I had always been this person, and the generator dispute had just revealed it. Either way, I was glad for how things turned out. The generator still sat in our backyard, now completely invisible behind the mature shrubs. It had become part of the landscape, unremarkable and uncontroversial. Exactly as it should be. And that was the real victory, I realized. Not the dramatic confrontation or the legal battle or the legislative change, but the simple fact that a piece of safety equipment could exist peacefully in a suburban backyard without causing conflict. That common sense had prevailed. That ordinary people could live their lives without unreasonable interference. That was worth fighting for. That was worth everything.